Hi, everybody. I'm Skip Elsheimer. Welcome to the AV Geeks Lunchtime Streaming Show, where we watch old 16mm films. And I am not in the archive. We are traveling. Hopefully, we are in New York at this point, or New Jersey, or almost there. But yeah, so I have some great films, some repeats. But usually, what I try to do is if I find a new film that's really interesting, I try to augment it with other films. And I found some that I think. So my assistant Kayshawn has been scanning some of the Cornet stuff, and he ran across this film called Journey to a Star, a science fantasy. And he was like, oh my God, you've got to watch this film. You've got to watch this film. You've got to show this film. So he finally gave me the file to look at today, and I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. So today is all thematic astronaut moon stuff. So the first film is, this one is a silent film, and this came from the Mogul Brothers collection via the Oregon Archive. It's called Moonland, and it's silent, but it's pretty awesome. Next is Guinea Pigs to the Moon. Well, I'm sorry, that's part of the show. The actual film is a Cornet film. It's called Our Class Explores the Moon. And you can compare and contrast this to the other film. America's First Woman Astronaut, which is a NASA film. Astronaut Training. And then finally, Journey to a Star, a science fantasy, which I think was German-made or Eastern German-made. I don't know. And then Cornet just released it. I don't know. It has a real Soviet vibe to it, so I'm wondering if it's East Germany. I don't know. But anyways, thanks for watching today. I don't know if I'll be live. I'll be in New York City Friday night, which is tonight. If you're in New York City at Anthology Film Archives at 7:30, I'll be showing live on 16mm when puppets go bad. So if you're in town, come and see us. Then on Tuesday at Light Industry in Brooklyn, I'll be showing films that warped my psyche. Films that either I enjoyed kind of when I watch now as an adult, they were like, yeah, that is me as a kid. That's how I feel as a kid, or how I felt as a kid. And at least one film that drove me to tears and completely like damaged my psyche permanently. So that's on 7:30 on Tuesday. Then we'll be in Huntington, New York on Thursday at 7:30, and we'll be showing the puppets again, the scary puppets. So if you like what you saw, hit the thumbs up, hit the like, hit the subscribe. You can go to ko-fi.com/avgeeks or patreon.com/avgeeks. You can also donate via the super thanks button. And I just realized I have not changed that yet. Before and after. That's, yeah. Anyways, that was a film that I showed days ago. So this is, I'm all discombobulated. But thanks for tuning in. Have a great weekend. Maybe I'll see you live. I don't know. But everybody take care. Bye.
Food, water, air. Do you know what all this means? It means that our class is going to explore the moon. Not really, of course. We're just going to pretend. 2 of us will be leaving for the moon soon. What do moon travelers need for their trip? They need spacesuits, of course. They also need air because there isn't any air on the moon. And they need water because there isn't any water there either. And of course they need food because they'll be gone many days. Can we make a model to show the imaginary trip we'll take to the moon? Yes. This represents the Earth. If the Earth were this size, then the moon would be only this big. The distance from the Earth to the moon is about as far as 10 trips around the world, about 250,000 miles. The trip will begin on Earth. We'll use a spaceship with rocket engines. The rockets will blast off. In just a few minutes, the ship is going about 25,000 miles an hour. Now we can shut off the engines. Earth's gravitation starts slowing the ship, but it is going fast enough to coast all the way to the moon. It will take about 2.5 days to get there. Then the ship will be turned around. The retro rockets will be fired, and the ship will settle down to its landing place on the moon. To help them make the trip, the 2 moon explorers will take a map which shows how they will travel from the Earth to the moon. Now they are ready for their make-believe trip. All right, are you ready to pretend with us in the spaceship our class has made? Then imagine our travelers are in a real spaceship and ready to blast off. Here we go. The spaceship travels faster and faster. The space travelers can see where they're going through the viewscope on the instrument panel. Here's their first view of space. Here are the stars, and there ahead is the moon. This signal means their ship will soon be traveling 25,000 miles per hour. Now, engines off. Let's look at our space map. Here's where they are. Now, for 2.5 days, they will coast at great speed through space to the moon. As they get closer to the moon, they can see it better and better. They can see the dark places and light places that make the moon seem to have a face when you look at it from Earth. Through the ship's telescope, they see the light-colored places more closely. These are the highlands of the moon. The moon is very rough here. The dark-colored places are much smoother. It's easy to see the holes called craters in these dark, flat parts of the moon. Long ago, people thought the dark parts were water, so these places were called seas. Even though we know there isn't any water on the moon, we still call these places seas. Around the seas, we find the high mountains of the moon. There are craters all over the moon. in the smooth seas and the rough highlands. Here's a large one. There are craters of all sizes on the moon. Now nearly 2 days have passed. Where are the travelers now? Here, almost all the way to the moon. This far away from the Earth, Earth's gravitational pull is very weak, while the moon's pull on them is becoming stronger. Soon the moon's pull on their ship will make it move faster toward the moon. But what's that? Radar warning. Things are moving through space just ahead of the ship. Meteoroids. They're big rocks that could be dangerous if they hit the ship. Meteoroids may have made many of the craters on the moon. The meteoroids have passed, and the ship is safe. The moon is getting closer and closer. Soon the space travelers will be exploring it. The sun is shining on the side where they'll land. The sun makes the moon very hot because the moon has no air to shelter it. But the travelers' spacesuits will protect them from the very hot sun. When it's daytime on one side of the moon, it's nighttime on the other side. Nights on the moon are very, very cold. If they landed on the night side, their spacesuits would also protect them from the cold. Now they are just a few thousand miles from the moon. It's time to get ready to land. Don't forget the air tanks. They'll need them when they leave their spaceship. The moon's gravitation is pulling them closer and closer, faster and faster. The signal to fire the retro rockets and slow them down should come any second now. All right, fire. And prepare for a landing on the moon. Now their ship is on the moon. Be careful climbing down the ship's ladder. Look out! Falling isn't as dangerous on the moon as it is on Earth. The moon's gravitation doesn't pull you as much. If you weighed 42 pounds on Earth, you'd weigh only 7 pounds on the moon. That's why it's fun to jump. You feel like you're floating. Look at the sky, and you'll see another thing that's interesting about the moon. You see the stars, even though it's daytime. Here's something else that's interesting about the moon. You can't just talk to someone who is nearby. Sound travels through the air, but there isn't any air on the moon, so the space traveler has to use his radio to tell his friend to look at something in the sky. There's the Earth, 250,000 miles away. And 93 million miles away over there is the sun. We know the sun makes day and night on the Earth, just as it does on the moon. But daytime on the moon is 2 weeks long. Nights are 2 weeks long, too. Now the explorers are going up to the top of the hill they're on. From here, they can see the parts of the moon they saw through the viewscope when they were in their ship. Over there are distant mountains many miles high. There's a high cliff. They didn't see that before. Far off, they see big craters, nearly 100 miles across. And little craters nearby, just a few feet wide. And here's one of the seas of the moon. But there isn't any water in it. They can see that. Exploring the moon is a wonderful adventure. As the moon slowly turns, the part they are on is turning away from the sun. The cold night is coming. Now it's time to go back to Earth. Their exploration of the moon is over. The rockets are firing, and we're on our way home again. And finally, we're back on Earth again, right in our classroom. The trip was fun. Now that these travelers are back, the others in our class want to ask them many questions about their make-believe trip. Even when you're only pretending, there's much to see and much to learn when you explore the moon.
The Screen News Digest is presented by the people from Appalachian Power Company.
Space, the final frontier. And like most frontiers, space has been man's domain. After 6 Mercury flights, 10 Gemini, 11 Apollos, 3 Skylabs, and numerous Soyuz, Cosmos, and Vostoks, only 2 women have ever ventured into space. Both were Russians, and both little more than Soviet-style Barbie dolls. Neither had any technical skills or scientific training. They were merely along for the ride, allowing TASS, the Russian news service, to boast, "A brilliant star has flared up in the cosmic firmament. Never and in no country did women ever attain such height." Perhaps, but in the United States, space remained an exclusive male domain. It was American men who first walked in space and then set the first human footprints on a planet other than Earth. And subsequent flights have remained a sort of free-floating bachelor party. Until now.
Main stage. 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition.
America's first women astronauts are soaring into space as flight engineers and mission specialists aboard the Space Shuttle. From 1960 until 1977, for reasons that will forever remain unclear, NASA was unable to find a single qualified woman candidate. Then, after examining 8,000 applicants for the shuttle program, 29 men and 6 women were selected as astronaut candidates. Among them, Sally Ride and Judy Resnick. The first American woman to venture into space will be Dr. Sally K. Ride. Height, 5 feet 5. Weight, 115 pounds. Brown hair, blue eyes. A description that might well fit thousands of young women today. But Sally Ride's vital statistics include a string of academic credentials that at first glance seem to belong to 3 people. At Stanford University, she simultaneously earned degrees in English and physics, then a master's and PhD in physics, specializing in astrophysics. When first notified of her selection in 1978, Ride immediately called her family.
They're almost as excited as I am. My mother's reaction was that I have another sister who's in theology. She's at a theological seminary, and my mother said, well, you know, one of the 2 of them's going to get to heaven.
For For Dr. Judy Resnick, a graduate of Carnegie Mellon with a Ph.D. in electrical engineering from the University of Maryland, becoming an astronaut was an almost inevitable step.
I decided to apply to be an astronaut when I was a graduate student finishing up my research work. It was not something that I had planned to do for my whole life. It was a case of being in the right place at the right time. NASA was advertising for astronauts at the time that I was looking for a job.
But flying jobs, until recently, have almost always belonged to men. Of course, women were allowed in the air, but nobody dreamed they would actually be able to fly the plane. Save for an occasional woman, such as Amelia Earhart, who made daring solo flights across the Atlantic and parts of the Pacific before being lost on a round-the-world flight in 1937. But for the most part, women were trained to fly as stewardesses, not pilots. And when visionaries such as Jules Verne began to dream that spaceflight was even possible, they peopled their fantasies with male astronauts. In this 1903 version of Jules Verne's A Trip to the Moon, movie pioneer George Melly used women as decorative accessories who never left the ground. As America moved into the space age, its first astronauts were monkeys, males, of course. Such monkey business led Jerry Cobb, an America's foremost woman pilot, to comment bitterly, "NASA won't let me take the actual training course, but I see they have a chimpanzee who is being trained to take it." Then in 1959, 7 astronauts were chosen for America's first manned spaceflight program, dubbed Mercury. Understandably, NASA's first candidates were military test pilots and, of course, men. They were, after all, little more than human cannonballs who would be fired into space and brought back to Earth by ground control. Surely a job for Superman and not Lois Lane.
Arm light on. Switching command to internal.
By 1965, spaceflight had become complicated. A 2-man capsule, part of the Gemini program, was launched. And in Gemini, the astronauts were actually to fly the vehicle and to make daringly beautiful walks in space. All this, of course, was preparation for the Apollo mission, which would set men on the moon. Now, women astronauts are being trained alongside their male counterparts, and NASA had to deal with the obvious differences in male-female anatomy. Would they have to redesign the shuttle capsule to accommodate those differences? It turned out only the spacesuits had to be made smaller to fit the smaller female form. And with the increasing number of jobs to be done in space, a new type of astronaut, the mission specialist, has evolved.
The mission specialist does things associated with the experiments on board or deploying the satellites, while the pilots do most of the flying of the orbiter. On the mission that I've been assigned to, the mission specialist will be doing work on deploying a communication satellite, which will be done from the panels behind me.
One of Dr. Ride's on-orbit jobs will be to manipulate the arm, this super sophisticated 50-foot crane. Our Articulated like a giant human arm, it will launch and retrieve objects in space, like a shortstop fielding and throwing a ball. Astronaut training is as physically demanding as any sport. For Ride, who as a teenager had been a nationally ranked junior tennis player and who still runs 5 miles a day, it is no problem. Meetings are a constant feature of astronaut training, as is flying. In Air Force T-38 jet trainers, Ride, Resnick, and the other mission specialists learn radio and navigational systems. In flight, prospective astronauts are introduced to G-forces, the increasing pull of gravity on the body during a rapid climb or pull-out from a dive that can cause the inexperienced to black out. For Sally Ride, the experience proved so exhilarating, she went on and learned to fly and now holds a private pilot's license. Of course, what goes up must eventually come down, even spacecraft. And so astronaut training is filled with ups and downs. And in the event the vehicle must land in the water, the astronauts must learn to get their feet wet. In simulators such as this, NASA can reproduce virtually every moment of the shuttle's flight. From blast-off to orbit, every sequence of the flight is generated by computers that feed readings into the exact replica of the shuttle's complex instrument panels. The idea is to prepare for any eventuality so that no matter what happens, the astronauts will react instantly and correctly. After simulation comes the real thing.
That was a super summary and a
For
great
Dr. Ride, it begins with her selection as a CAPCOM, capsule communicator, the only person on the ground to communicate directly with the shuttle astronauts in orbit. It's an awesome responsibility, but Ride is not above a little fun.
Is that the vampire that goes with the red blood cells?
Something like that.
But nothing on Earth can quite match the experience of weightlessness that is the quintessential physical condition of spaceflight. The closest NASA can come is in the cargo bay of a C-135, the Air Force's giant jet cargo plane. If even a few seconds of weightlessness can lead to euphoria, parachute training can bring one down to Earth very quickly. Now spaceflight has become even more complicated, and the space shuttle has become NASA's workhorse. Dr. Resnick.
The shuttle is a very versatile tool. We can do experiments on orbit. We can repair satellites that might have malfunctioned or change their film packs. We can study the stars and look outward. We can study the Earth and look back down.
There are advantages in almost every field of science. Astrophysics is obvious. X-rays don't make it through the atmosphere, so you have to be in space to do any experimentation at all. There are any number of things that you might be able to learn in physiology about the human body that just the way that it reacts to weightlessness, I'm sure will be very important. Materials processing.
Materials processing in space involves understanding and studying how materials combine. For example, if you can put metals together and make different types of alloys, and their properties are different if they're manufactured without gravity than they are in gravity.
If we date the space program from 1957, the year the Russians launched Sputnik, to the moment when STS-7, the space shuttle Challenger, lifts off with astronaut Dr. Sally K. Ride aboard, it will have taken women 26 years to finally get into space. Was it worth it? Why the desperate desire to leave the Earth? to challenge the vast unknown of space. Dr. Ride.
Well, for one thing, it's there. I mean, you have to do it.
And as the Space Shuttle Challenger lifts off with Dr. Sally K. Ride among its astronauts, America truly enters the space age.
In May 1961, Alan Shepard became the first American astronaut in space, an effort requiring special talents and skills. He was boosted into space atop a 59-foot rocket. He traveled in a small, cramped spacecraft. The trip was short and quick. Today, it's the Saturn V, 281 feet tall, and 3 men fly in the Apollo spacecraft. Their goal is a round trip to the moon. As the missions and spacecraft have changed over the years, so have the requirements for astronauts. The original 7 were heading into an unknown environment. They were engineers and test pilots. Gradually, the standards changed. The test pilot requirement was dropped. Today, nearly a third of the astronauts have their doctor's degrees. The training reflects the era. Unsure of how the human body would respond to spaceflight, the Mercury astronauts were trained for every possibility. As more flights provided knowledge, the astronauts found they did not need such simulators as this disorientation-producing Mastiff. The astronaut training program now follows this schedule. On arrival, all astronauts, pilots, and scientists receive intensive academic training to assure that they have achieved a common level of spaceflight knowledge. Classroom courses include such diverse subjects as celestial mechanics, rocket propulsion, space physics, space medicine, and geology. Classroom work is supplemented with field trips. The astronauts collecting samples on the surface of the moon will have the equivalent study of a master's degree in geology. Just as the pilot-engineer astronauts are trained as scientists, so the scientist astronauts, upon completion of their academics, are trained as pilots. All astronauts are proficient helicopter pilots, since the landing on the moon will be in a vertical landing and takeoff vehicle using rockets instead of rotor blades. The general training of the astronaut also includes instruction on survival in the desert and in the jungle, since a spacecraft could land in these terrains in case of emergency. Water survival techniques are taught since the spacecraft normally lands at sea. In the giant centrifuge or flight accelerator, they experience the high gravity sensations they will feel during their ride on a big booster and during re-entry. To become familiar with the sensations of zero gravity or weightlessness, the astronauts ride in aircraft flying precise trajectories. Scuba training is given since another method of simulating weightlessness is by working underwater. In specially constructed tanks, the astronauts enter the water weighted to provide neutral buoyancy. Once underwater, they practice work they may one day perform in the true zero gravity of space. This then is the general astronaut training program. But what happens to an astronaut once he is named to a flight crew? Training for the specific mission follows much the same pattern as general training. But now, classroom work is pointed at the goals of the mission and the hardware and techniques the astronauts must use to accomplish these goals. In the complex computer-operated electronic mechanism called the Command Module Simulator, the astronauts learn singly and as a team systems and characteristics of their three-man ship. Similarly, the Lunar Module Simulator is used to train flight crews in the operation of the two-man lunar landing vehicle. The Dynamic Crew Procedures Simulator is used to train them to make split-second go, no-go decisions during launch. The rocket and jet engine-powered Lunar Landing Training Vehicle is used to simulate the critical lunar landing. Simulators are used to train astronauts to work in the 1/6 gravity on the surface of the moon. The astronauts fly the Translation and Docking Simulator to perform the critical rendezvous and docking of the lunar module and command module in lunar orbit. Apollo is a complex program with a complex goal. The training today's astronauts receive equipped them to cope with complexities that were unknown 10 years ago.
In the year 2169, exactly 200 years after the first landing on Earth's moon, we succeeded in sending a manned spaceship beyond the solar system. This film report has been made for your class on galactic exploration. As you know, the ship landed on planet PC-4 of the Proxima Centauri planetary system. The ship, Photon 1, was of simple design. Its purpose to carry a crew of 4 men, 4 1/4 light years to our nearest star, Proxima Centauri, and then carry them back again. I commanded the ship. As you know, I am Jomo Gawa of the United States of Africa. Pierre Vaught of the United States of Europe and Chang Sakura of the United States of Asia were astrobiоphysicists like Ken Waters of the United States of America. My specialty was the photon drive of the ship. This was our crew on the historic voyage to Proxima Centauri. We blasted off from Tranquility Base on the moon, and so began our long journey out of the solar system. During most of it, we slept in suspended animation, and the years went swiftly by. Automatic sensors awakened us as we entered the gravitational field of planet PC-4 of the Proxima Centauri system. The long journey was nearing its end. In the control room, Chang and I watched the rapidly approaching planet on the viewing screen. At 20,000 miles out, I alerted Ken. He called Pierre at the experimental garden, and they returned to the control room to prepare for a landing on planet PC-4. So it was, in the year 2273, that men from Earth first touched down on a planet in an alien planetary system. As you watch this historic landing, please recall that the star, Proxima Centauri, is a red dwarf, a close companion of the double stars Alpha Centauri A and B. It forms, with them, a triple star system. Our first close view of the planet showed strange streams of smoke. We were puzzled, but you will learn the nature of the smoke in your introductory course in galactic biochemistry. Now the time had come. Pierre and Ken would explore the planet. I wished them well. Chang and I stayed in the control room while Ken and Pierre prepared to enter the mysterious fumes of that unexplored planet. I maintained voice and video contact with them, and so we watched anxiously from the ship while Pierre and Ken took man's first uncertain steps onto planet PC-4. The strange smoke had disappeared by now, and they could see the surface. Ahead of them, they sent the gyrostat, a robot vehicle that would warn of possible dangers. Ken followed in the surface car. Pierre walked on the surface. His first job was to examine the soil of the planet. His findings are built into your course on galactic geophysics, which you'll be taking next semester. Chang and I monitored all the activities outside the ship, which were automatically recorded by telesensor equipment. Instruments fed data into the memory banks of the ship concerning gravitational, magnetic, and electrostatic fields, atmospheric composition, and radiation levels. Pierre found what appeared to be a form of vegetation and held it up for us to see. By then, Ken had left the surface car. Pierre signaled him, and they both moved toward an unusually shaped object. What it was, they had no idea, but they suspected that it, too, might be some kind of plant life. While the soil where we had landed was hard and rock-like, nearby the soil was soft, much like the plains of our moon. Ken tested it carefully, but it supported him well. Inside the ship, Chang and I watched them intently. They were feeling very good. Everything seemed to be going quite well. But Chang saw something that worried him, and then I saw it too. Perhaps 100 meters ahead of where Pierre and Ken stood was what appeared to be a zone of darkness that seemed to envelop some kind of vegetation. I called Ken. Even with his vast knowledge of astrobiophysics, he was unable to even guess at the nature of the zone of darkness. So we decided to send the gyrostat into it. The gyrostat entered the darkness and disappeared from view. It immediately stopped sending signals, so we knew nothing of what was happening to it in the darkness. When it returned, we knew no more about the zone of darkness than we had before the gyrostat had entered it. Ken decided that he would explore the zone himself. Ken told me of his plans, and then, dropping an instrument packet from the surface car for the experiments Pierre would set up, Ken guided the vehicle toward the zone of darkness. Even the search beam on the surface car could not penetrate that mysterious darkness. And so Ken entered it. For just a moment, I maintained voice contact with him, even though I could see nothing of him in the zone of darkness. But almost immediately, contact was lost. I tried again and again to reach him. Meanwhile, Pierre had set up some experiments and collected materials unaware of the problem. There seemed to be only one thing to do. Pierre had to be sent into the zone of darkness to find Ken. Pierre hesitated at the edge of the zone for a moment. Then he announced he was entering and disappeared from video and voice contact. Although Ken had lost contact with the ship, he was perfectly safe by the surface car. He had decided that he was in some kind of forest. Some distance away, Pierre had decided the same thing. He too was safe, but hopelessly lost. And then, to our utter amazement, the dark zone began to brighten. Chang and I could see it was a forest. As the dark zone brightened, voice contact returned. Ken was able to find his way around and collect some samples of plants. Now Pierre found Ken at the surface car and helped him collect samples. The hours passed rapidly. Then, just as suddenly as the dark zone had brightened, it darkened. The event had been recorded in the ship's memory bank, so I played it back to study it. As the zone had darkened, the sky had brightened. With that as a clue, I proposed a theory which later proved to be correct. You will learn about it in your classes on the photosynthesis of alien plant life. Here briefly is what is now called the Gawa theory of light absorption. PC4 has 3 suns. Its major sun is Proxima Centauri. When it sets, the double stars Alpha Centauri A and B are still in the sky. Now, the planets of the zone require great amounts of light. When Proxima Centauri is in the sky, they absorb all the light and other radiant energy that reaches them. This causes the zone of darkness and makes radio communication impossible. But after Proxima Centauri sets, the planets rest and absorb only certain wavelengths of the light from the double stars. So the zone brightens and takes on its beautiful colors and radio communication is possible. Then, when Proxima Centauri rises again over the rapidly rotating PC4, the planets once again absorb all the light and other radiant energy, and the zone of darkness returns. After viewing the information from the memory banks, Chang agreed with my explanation. Meanwhile, the surface car emerged from the darkness. But neither Pierre nor Ken were aboard. There were only samples of vegetation from the forest. Chang hurried to meet the car, hoping there would be some clue to explain what had become of the men. The surface car was elevated into the unloading room, but there was no clue as to why it had returned to the ship alone. But the explanation is simple, as Chang soon discovered, and as you already know from your introductory history unit on galactic exploration. Earlier, when Ken was loading the car in the zone of darkness, the last branch caught on the start switch and sent the car back to the ship. I tried to contact them again, but the zone of darkness blocked communication. Meanwhile, Chang began an analysis of the plant materials that he had taken from the surface car. The plants were reduced to a powder in the molecular disintegrator whose operating principles you are all familiar with. While Chang was investigating the molecular structure of the plants, Pierre and Ken were observing their behavior. They were strongly attracted to light, even to the small photon lamps, but mainly to the light of Proxima Centauri. The plants were broken down quickly into a fine powder. But as Chang was carrying the powder to his laboratory table, he was startled by my voice and spilled some powder on our garden. The major discovery of our voyage was accidental. I had asked Chang to take the surface car out as quickly as possible to find Pierre and Ken and bring them back to the ship. Chang found them quickly. They told him what they had discovered about the plants, about their extreme sensitivity to light. Chang told them about the light rays from Proxima Centauri and my theory. It made sense to them that the plants of the forest could have caused the zone of darkness by absorbing light. I waited patiently. Chang knew the way out of the zone, but Pierre and Ken weren't ready to leave yet. They still wanted to do some exploring. Chang said he'd wait for them in the surface car. Their decision was an unfortunate one and almost ended in disaster. They turned on a powerful photon lamp and the trouble began. Chang rushed to help them. They thought they were trapped, but they were unaware of the strange biochemical processes of planet PC4, As you have studied, the smoke from the burning plants was heat absorbing and reduced the temperature of the fire until the flames were extinguished. Evidently, the fire had caused a chemical change in the plants. Later studies of the biochemistry of PC4 would result in the new field of molecular fire control. And so they made their way safely out of the zone of darkness and back to the ship, Photon 1. It was now that we came upon our history-making discovery. Here you are seeing it just as it happened. We were amazed at the size of the plants in our laboratory. Something incredible had happened. Then Chang remembered how he had accidentally spilled some of the powder from the alien plants onto the Earth plants. This time we did it intentionally to see what would happen. And so it was that we discovered that fantastic growth substance that has since solved all food problems on Earth and on the other colonized planets of the galaxy. This discovery of what is now called the Centauri nutrient alone made the voyage to Proxima Centauri worthwhile. We were eager to return to Earth with the substance that we knew would benefit all mankind. No one need ever be without food again. The voyage to Proxima Centauri was a total success. And now, please plug in your quiz machines. We have a test ready for you based on the video lesson you have just experienced. Good luck.